Today we're going to talk about 5 tips by Professor Arthur Brooks on how to be happier. So the first tip would be that on our pursuit of happiness, we shouldn't search for happiness, but we should search for, as Oprah Winfrey, who wrote a book with him, put it, we should pursue happierness, because there's never a point at which you're going to be 100% happy all the time. And it's also better that way. It sounds awful that why can't we be happy all the time? But the point is, if you were happy all the time, then you wouldn't be alive for too long. Because if we didn't have negative emotions to warn us when something's going wrong, to make us afraid when there is danger, if we were happy all the time and were totally fearless, then we would die very quickly. If we just, for example, if we just saw a lion and would think, oh, everything's so wonderful, oh, that lion looks so fluffy, let's go and cuddle it, then you would die very quickly. So negative emotions are always going to be there, and they should be there. It's functional to have negative emotions, and they're there for a reason. So even if we could reach a happy state 100% of the time, we wouldn't really want it, because it would be dangerous for us. Now, the mistake many people make when they're trying to pursue happiness is that they always think that we're kind of reaching for this happy state of being happy all the time. And they always then think that, okay, once I've reached this certain milestone, once I've done this, then I'll be happy. And this point is never reached and can never be reached. And that way we work so hard to pursue happiness, and therefore we postpone happiness. As Chris Williamson very often talks about, how by pursuing happiness, as in working really hard, what we're doing there is avoiding happiness in order to pursue it, which doesn't make any sense at all. Because if you trade the things that make you happy for the things that don't make you happy in the moment, but you think will make you happy at some point in time, if you only do things that postpone your happiness in order to get it at some point, you will be very, very unhappy. You will be postponing your happiness constantly. Now, a psychological term for this would basically be the hedonic treadmill. And the reason why pursuing more and more doesn't make you happier is because of the way that dopamine works. The body always tries to adjust to bring us back to homeostasis, and having too much dopamine all the time isn't good for us. So our body will always bring our dopamine levels back to baseline at some point. And therefore, pursuing more and more and more won't make you happier, simply because dopamine doesn't work that way. A great experiment that shows how more and more and more doesn't make you happier would be an experiment on monkeys that Robert Sapolsky, a professor of neurobiology, talks about. At first, when the monkey didn't expect the raisin, giving that monkey a raisin would increase that monkey's level of dopamine. And then when they continued giving that monkey the raisin and the monkey started expecting that, it didn't make a difference at all. So after a while, they would have to give the monkey 2 raisins in order for it to be unexpected again, and in order to therefore increase that monkey's dopamine levels. And then at some point though, also with the 2 raisins, it would come to a point where giving that monkey those 2 raisins won't increase its dopamine levels anymore, because that monkey has become used to that. Now, what's even more surprising, and what is really interesting, is then once the monkey is used to getting 2 raisins, once you unexpectedly give the monkey only 1 raisin again, that monkey will actually have a decrease in dopamine levels, which is insane if you think about it, because that same raisin that increased the monkey's dopamine levels in the beginning, that very same amount of just 1 raisin would all of a sudden decrease its levels of dopamine. And this explains why pursuing more might even make you unhappier. We often think that dopamine is like the reward molecule, but actually that's rather serotonin. Dopamine, however, is actually, as you can see by the experiment that I've explained, for example, dopamine isn't the reward molecule, it's rather the molecule of pursuit. And there you can see that it's really about the journey and not the destination, because one very same destination in different contexts, when it's expected and when it's not expected, can lead to a totally different outcome when it comes to dopamine levels. And then the second tip is that Arthur Brooks found that the people who had higher levels of happiness in general, what they all had in common is that they basically had the three macronutrients. So if you think about the three macronutrients when it comes to health, or when it comes to your diet, obviously that would be carbs, fat, and protein. But when it comes to happiness, these macronutrients, so to speak, that made the people who were happier than people with average happiness levels, what they all had in common is that they had satisfaction, enjoyment, and meaning all in balance, and that they had a lot of all of those macronutrients. Enjoyment and meaning, I don't really have to explain that much because it's pretty clear what's meant by that. However, you might be thinking, okay, so what exactly does satisfaction mean? Satisfaction would basically mean, in the context of Arthur Brooks' work, would basically mean the reward you get for hard work. That is satisfaction. So it is important to strive, but you also have to be grateful as well. You have to balance striving for something and being happy with what you've got if you want to be happy. When it comes to enjoyment, you probably think, okay, enjoyment is probably basically just like, for example, pleasure. It's just about feeling good. However, Arthur Brooks emphasizes that enjoyment doesn't equal pleasure. They're two different things. Pleasure would be just seeking pleasure, as in, for example, drugs, alcohol, all those things that give us pleasure in the short term, but don't give us pleasure anymore in the long term. Those things are pleasure and not enjoyment. One way you may see that you're kind of developing an addiction would be if you use that substance just to give you pleasure and not in the context of a moment in your life that you're enjoying and you're making a little nicer, for example, by having friends that you care about near you while you're doing that. If you start, for example, drinking lots of alcohol all alone, at home, with no one there, doing nothing, then you're most certainly starting or have become an alcoholic. Enjoyment is more about living in the moment, doing things that you enjoy doing with your friends, for example, whereas pleasure is just using the substance for the substance itself, basically, for the pleasure that you get from that substance itself, without it being in a broader context. Which reminds me, when you think of ads of cigarettes, for example, you would never ever see, for example, a person all alone by themselves and like a really dark ad where they feel really lonely and just someone smoking there. What you would see in ads for cigarettes is people smiling, laughing, having fun in nature with their friends, or on a beautiful sunny day, doing something that's really exciting and smoking cigarettes while they're doing that. Because if they showed ads with cigarettes in a more realistic way, in a way that you see someone all alone by themselves being addicted to the substance and just smoking it because they feel the need to have to do that, without being in a context that would genuinely be already very nice by itself, no one would then want to start smoking in the first place, I think, if there were those kinds of ads. Now, when it comes to meaning, Arthur Brooks found that the life of religious people, not necessarily because of the religion itself, it has lots of components that would also make people happy if they didn't believe. So, for example, when it comes to religious people, have a sense of meaning. And this sense of meaning would also make someone who doesn't believe happy if they attach their sense of meaning to something else. Or another great example of a component of religious people's lives would be that religious people tend to, for example, meet up once a week on Sundays usually, or Saturdays depending which church you go to. Anyway, they meet up once a week with a group of people that they regularly see and that they probably get to know over time, and that they over time start liking, and that is kind of their support system, so to speak. And this meeting up regularly, for example, once a week, is very beneficial for one's well-being. For example, a behavioral scientist found that people who live in rural areas opposed to in the city, what's really interesting is that they earn much less, they're way poorer. And you would expect that if they're poorer, that means that they are less happy. However, people who live in rural places actually are happier than people who live in cities on average, even though they earn way less. And the reason is that people who live in rural areas, they are much closer to their neighbours and they know the people in their community much better than people who are totally career focused and don't spend any time with anyone. And that's why, even though they earn less, they tend to be happier. And also, you might have probably heard about this Harvard study where it was a longitudinal study, which means that they followed these people over a long span of time. This study found that the people who had the most friends, or the best relationships, also the quality of the relationships, that those people were the happiest. And that would be the fifth tip, that it's really important to have a social life. Now, if you want to know tips by Arthur Brooks on how to have healthy relationships, because they're so important for your well-being, you can watch this video here.